All right, everyone. Good evening. My name is Perla Rodriguez. I'm the president of the board of directors for San Jose Spotlight. Welcome to Common Ground, a conversation on gun policy in Silicon Valley. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors, Heising Simmons Foundation, Hope and Heal Fund, and the Knight Foundation. One of the most critical and divisive conversations facing our country and city today centers around gun policy. The issue hits home for us. In May, a gunman opened fire and killed 9 of his coworkers at a VTA rail yard in downtown San Jose. We have one of those victims' widows joining us today. This panel brings together elected leaders, victims of gun violence, Second Amendment advocates, and community leaders for a thoughtful discussion on gun policy and common sense solutions. Today, we have Spanish, Vietnamese, and American Sign Language interpreters for this meeting. And on the screen, you'll see the instructions. To hear this event in English, please select EN channel for English, clicking on the world icon next to the taskbar at the bottom of your screen. If you're using a smartphone, you'll find it on the 3 dots on the corner of your screen. The Spanish and Vietnamese participants can listen to the event by following the instructions on the screen. One of our panelists will be speaking in Spanish during some parts of the event. When she does, you don't have to do anything. Our interpreter will be interpreting into English what she is saying. Just make sure you're always on the EN or English channel. If anyone is having trouble hearing or speaking during the meeting, please select my square and send me a note. And lastly, before we get started, attendees are welcome to ask questions. Please select the Q&A box to answer your questions, for us to be able to read your question, and we'll do our very best to get through as many questions as we can. And with that, I'd like to go ahead and get us started and introduce all of our panelists. I'd like to first introduce Vice Mayor Charles Chappie Jones. He was elected to the San Jose City Council in November of 2014 and represents City Council District 1, the region of West San Jose that borders the cities of Campbell, Cupertino, Santa Clara, and Saratoga. Chappie was born in Sacramento and moved to San Jose in the 1990s. His upbringing instilled a strong sense of civic responsibility and made him into a tenacious advocate of civil service, fiscal culpability, and community engagement. Prior to his election, Chappie worked in the private sector, where he held sales management positions with Apple and AT&T, was an executive manager with Cornerstone Consulting and Technology, and owned a technology service business. Thank you for joining us this evening, Vice Mayor Jones. Next, I would like to introduce Kirk Barton. Kirk grew up in New York City, and he has been your San Jose neighbor and my San Jose neighbor for over 20 years. Kirk is very passionate about public spaces and local land use, and he thanks Vice Mayor Jones because he was made co-chair of the urban village of the Stevens Creek Advisory Group. He is also the vice president of the Corey Neighborhood Association and has been the president of the Winchester Neighborhood Action Coalition for almost a decade. In addition, Kirk is a special advisor to Santa Clara's mayor, Lisa Gilmore. In 2006, Kirk left his tech job and started a small pizza shop in Santa Clara called A Slice of New York. And in 2011, opened a second location in Sunnyvale. In 2017, they became the first brick and mortar worker cooperative in the South Bay, and recently received the Small Business of the Year award from Assembly member Alex Lee. Kirk is dedicated to finding solutions that balance the need to deal with violence while protecting the constitutional rights of others. Thank you, Kirk, for being here tonight. Next, I'd like to introduce Maria Inés Ortega. Gracias por Mexico and immigrated to the United States in 1999. She's lived in the Cadillac Winchester area since 2000, where she lives with her husband and 3 children. She began her activism work through her participation at Rosemary Elementary through parent workshops and has developed a great passion and commitment to speaking up for her community. While she doesn't speak English fluently, she has continued to pursue her education while working full-time and supporting her family. Maria Inez was an original member of the Cadillac Winchester Neighborhood Association that was formed back in 2016, and she became the president in 2020. Maria Inez hopes to empower her community by speaking up and being engaged in the process of bringing resources to her community. She loves her community and will continue to fight to make sure safety is a priority in her neighborhood. Thank you, Maria Inez, for joining us. Gracias. Tara Fritsch. Tara Fritsch is a Bay Area native. She met her husband, Alex, who was also a Bay Area native, raised in Ben Lomond. They settled down in San Jose, where they raised two boys, Atticus, who's 18, and Justin, who's 17. Tara was a stay-at-home mom while also enduring 3 spine injuries that were the result of a work injury for 18 years. While her husband, Alex, was the solo financial supporter of their family, Tara worked hard to overcome her spine injury and lost over 100 pounds through exercise and a healthy lifestyle. This experience led Tara to want to help others who have injuries or chronic pain. And during COVID, Tara used her time to study and become a personal trainer that specializes in corrective movements. She had just started working for the first time in almost 19 years when her husband, Alex, was the victim of the VTA mass shooting. Since her husband's death, Tara has become an advocate for families of the VTA mass shooting, fighting for fair financial treatment from VTA. She has also contacted lawmakers about creating legislation at the state and federal levels that would allow government to seize the assets of people who commit mass shootings and distribute the liquidated funds to the families of the victims. If the assailant has minors who are not financially independent, they would also be treated as a victim. Tara, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I can't imagine how hard it is for you to be here, but perhaps you're the best place to start. Could you tell us a little bit about your husband, and how was it that you learned that he was one of the victims of the VTA mass shooting on May 26th?
Thanks for having me. My husband, Alex, was an amazing person. All he cared about was his family. And making sure that we were cared for. He did not live to work, he worked so he could live. He even took the graveyard shift so he would have extra pay and be able to be off during the day to be with me and the children. We were best friends. We had a very much a fairy tale relationship. We rode dirt bikes together, we did everything together. And he was just a very passionate, giving person who was always just out to have a really good time and enjoy himself and his life.
And as you think about what happened on May 26th, what do you think could have prevented this from happening? How could this violence have been prevented that day?
Well, first off, that day was something that was foreseen, unfortunately. Alex and I had a conversation about 6 months prior to the incident, where he had come home to me and shared that he had overheard the shooter actually state that he was going to kill one of the victims by shooting him in the head. And he had gone to his supervisor and told his supervisor about the situation, which was shocking for Alex. Alex really did not cause any kind of problems with anything and didn't get involved in very much that he didn't have to. And he came home and was very shaken and talked with me about it and said, this guy is really freaking me out. And, I said, well, what would you do if there was a shooting? And his response to me was, I would run and hide because you and the kids need me. And that morning of the incident, Alex was clockwork. He was exactly where he was supposed to be when he was supposed to be there. And I woke up at 7:05 and he was not home. He's always home by 6:45. And I knew in that moment that something wasn't right. So I started calling and texting him, and of course, there was no answer. And someone from Facebook actually messaged me and said, "Are you guys safe? There's a shooting happening at UTA. I think it's where Alex works." And I turned on the news, and there it was. And my heart just sunk into my stomach because we had talked about this. And I immediately called some friends, and they came over, and I was headed to the Family Reunification Center. And in the meantime, I was calling the coroner's office and Valley Medical. And I actually found Alex at Valley Medical at 8:15 in the morning. He was the only person that made it to the hospital and was still alive, barely. He was barely breathing on his own. And it was made very clear to me from the get-go that it was not going to be a survivable event. And so we went through measures to keep him with us long enough to get family to come and say their goodbyes. And he has 3 children. So he has a 30-year-old daughter that lives in San Diego. And she was able to come up, and boys were able to go in. And about 6 o'clock that evening, I put the do not resuscitate on him. And he's getting ready to take out his ventilator because he had been shot in the head. And I asked the night nurse if I could lay with him for one last time, because we had been married 20 years. And she allowed me to do that. She made that possible. And so I got in bed with him and laid next to him and held his hand. And the nurse was shocked because he started crying. And then he died. He took his last breath right there with me next to him. And this nightmare has been going since. And I think reality is that people don't take people serious. I think this could have been avoided if somebody took him serious, because he was very vocal, very, very vocal about what he wanted to do to a lot of people, including the Border Patrol. And no one stopped him. Nobody even told security about him. He had been reprimanded 5 times in that year, and no one had even told security that he was becoming a hostile employee. And there's just lots of changes that need to be made.
There are not any words, to express how, sorry we are for your loss, and thank you for being here and sharing, these intimate details of, your last moments with your husband, who was a phenomenal father and husband. I think that, tonight what we want to talk about is how can we prevent gun violence in our communities? How can we prevent other families and children and wives, from losing, loved ones in the senseless way that it happened on May 26th. And I'd like to talk a little bit to our lawmakers. We have here tonight Vice Mayor Chappie Jones, and what laws or policies do you think should be taking place in our city to prevent these types of terrible tragedies? I know that the San Jose City Council approved a policy requiring all gun shop owners to video and audio record sales of firearms, again, in an effort to prevent the purchases or the selling of firearms on the black market. That's one action that's been taken by the City Council. But what else can we do? What else can our community do?
Thank you, Perla. Before I answer your question, I just want to give a little context. This is a policy issue that we're going to discuss, but it's also very personal for me. I'm a victim of gun violence. When I was 19 years old, I got into an altercation with a person, and my offense was that I wouldn't let him cut in front of me at the drive-thru at Jack in the Box. The person became irate and fired a gun at me. Fortunately, I was lucky, and he missed, shot at my car, but I was not injured. And once I was safe, the first thing that came to my mind wasn't that I almost died, or I was almost a victim of gun violence. The first thing that came to my mind was, how would my parents have been able to go on if I had been killed? That was literally the first thing that came to my mind. Then in 1989, I was in Los Angeles working down there, and I started getting a ton of phone calls from my friends, and they were like, "Chappie, call me." The messages were just, "Chappie, call me right away." And it was a lot of my friends were calling. None of them would say why they were calling. So at that moment, you just have this, punch to the gut. There's a sinking feeling that something horrible has happened. And what happened was that a good friend of mine, Raymond August, was murdered on one of those random freeway shootings. And he was 28 years old, in the prime of his life, and really just never had an opportunity to get married and raise a family and do all the things that his future had ahead of him. And if you're able to see the headline, it says "A Gentle Man," and that's because Ray August was one of the nicest, kindest people that you've ever met. 18 years later, they interviewed his father, William August, and I just wanted to quote a couple of things that he said. "My whole life just went on hold. The things that I planned to do before, they're not even in the plans anymore. So here I am." And then he went on to say, "It was a very frustrating time, and I'm still in a very sad state. Losing your kid is the worst thing that can happen. You never expect to bury your kid, and I had to do that, and I can't get over it." And that was 18 years after Ray was murdered. The front page that you're looking at is from the newspaper that I kept all these years from 1989. And I'm telling you these stories just because we're going to talk about policy, but for me, this is very personal. And, sometimes it's hard to separate policy from personal, but we've heard, from my stories and Tara's story that, the impacts of gun violence aren't just, statistics, aren't just numbers, but they're families, they're people, they're friends that will never be the same. And Tara, I want to also say to you that my sincerest condolences and my heart goes out to you for what happened.
Thank you.
Now to answer your question. So yes, we have proposed that if you want to make a gun purchase from a gun shop, that it should be on video and audio recordings. And any customer that goes into any kind of store or retail establishment has an expectation that they're going to be recorded for loss prevention or just monitoring of activities at a retail establishment. There's an expectation that it will be on video and audio. So in terms of being an infringement on anybody's constitutional rights or civil liberties, I don't view that to be the case. I think that if we can reduce or eliminate straw purchases, and let me just give you one data point. It's been estimated there's approximately 30,000 straw purchases that take place every year. And I did a quick back of the envelope calculation that if 0.5% of those straw purchases took place in San Jose, that we're talking about 150 purchases. And if we can stop even half of those purchases from taking place, and of the purchases that we stop, if we could prevent one act of violence or one murder from taking place, then I think that our efforts to implement this policy is worthwhile. One life is one life too many. And there's probably going to be a discussion. I'm anticipating that there's going to be a question of, is this going to be effective? Is this going to make a difference? And my reply to that is, we have to try. We have to try everything in our toolkit to see what works and what doesn't work, and how we can, again, save one life.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. As you share your stories, thank you so much for sharing your stories and reminding us again of how violence has touched so many lives around our community and across the country. Knowing now more of the details of the shooting on May 26th, again, how are there policies that can specifically address, how to prevent an issue like what happened on May 26th? Because your point is a great one, right? The straw purchases policy, could that have prevented it? Probably not, but are there other policies that perhaps, the council might be looking at?
Definitely. Well, first of all, there's no guarantee that this could have been prevented. There's so many different factors, and it's very complex that caused this tragedy. So no one can stand up and say, we can put policies in place that would have prevented this. But what we can do is make things more difficult or challenging for someone to act out violently like this person did. One proposal is to have a gun violence restraining order. So it allows the courts to temporarily remove guns, ammunition, magazines from someone who is at risk to themselves or others. And it also would prevent them from buying more ammunition or guns or other means to harm other people. Red flag laws. We can implement red flag laws that where the courts can step in, and if someone is a victim of domestic violence and there's a gun identified in the household, that the law enforcement can step in, remove that gun, and go through the court in the legal process of whether that person is allowed to get that firearm back. So there are several different policy initiatives that we can pursue that could potentially have prevented this from happening. But like I said, initially, there's no guarantee, and there's no hard and fast policy or laws that we can implement that would, 100% prevent something like this from happening.
Thank you. I'd like to bring Kirk into the conversation. Kirk, we know, is a gun owner and a defender of the Second Amendment. Kirk, can you tell us what your thoughts are on the policies that San Jose has approved thus far? And are there any unintended consequences, such as punishing lawful gun owners?
Hi, thanks, Perla. So I actually had a couple of comments before I answer that specifically. I wanted to address something that Vice Mayor Jones talked about the 10 new laws that the council is considering. The first, I'd like to just say, how will a law like the straw purchases stop a mass shooting? And the reality is they don't. And if the intent here on that last question was to discourage straw purchases, or the notion that someone will legally buy a firearm for someone else that cannot buy one, that's a straw purchase. In fact, one of the questions asked on the very form you fill out when buying a firearm is, are you purchasing this firearm for yourself? And you need to answer this question under penalty of perjury. Knowing it is a felon, knowingly answering that incorrectly is a felony, and you become a criminal. And so that law already exists. So why did this council create a new law that is already redundant on the laws that are there? And Vice Mayor Jones mentioned about straw purchases. A review of enforcement records, I didn't find any in the last 20 years in San Jose. That was the straw purchase. And it is a big deal in our society. But why is the city wasting valuable resources or having a city attorney try and craft straw purchase education programs for a non-existent problem in this particular case? And kind of across the country example, why can't Mayor Liccardo, Vice Mayor Jones fund a dedicated lawyer in the U.S. Attorney's Office to prosecute these cases? If Columbia, South Carolina can do it, why can't San Jose? Go after the criminals instead of raising the cost at gun stores and install and maintain useless and in some cases expensive equipment. That was kind of a response to your first question that I just wanted to share that. But I really appreciate you asking kind of a holistic one, which if I could just take a moment and just kind of respond to that. The laws being proposed, again, there's 10 of them, do nothing, and specifically the biggest ones are around the gun tax and the liability insurance. But the laws being proposed do nothing to stop, prevent, reduce, or address gun violence. They would have done nothing to prevent the VTA tragedy. Laws like this will alienate legal firearm owners. I would ask the city to take a step back and focus on the goal of reducing gun crimes. And I believe we need to include more voices at the table, the many stakeholders that will be and already have been impacted by these laws. Not including their voices is shameful and has the optics of political grandstanding or virtual signaling. The city should be supporting and funding evidence-based practices that drive down gun violence, like solving gun crimes and prosecuting criminals, education programs, distributing free gun laws, etc. But doing something that is not helpful is counterproductive. And yes, legal owners of firearms will be unduly punished by definition, as they are the only people that will be impacted by this. Taxing and isolating a group of people purely based on their decision to embrace an enumerated constitutional right is discriminatory and un-American. Yes, there are issues with criminals and violence in our community, and we need to address that. But the solution to the problem should not be to punish the innocent due to false fears that guns cause crimes. That is a false equivalent. That kind of profiling is the very behavior we're trying to remove from our society. In addition, the proposed policies particularly targets the most vulnerable, people of color and the economically disadvantaged. And they are the most susceptible to violence. The city auditor report shows that violent criminals prey upon our lower income and minority community members, especially in districts 3, 5, and 7. With our extremely slow police response rates across the city, we have to wonder if these laws were passed, would families be able to protect themselves in the case the police don't arrive on time? And the answer to that to me is no, or worse yet, the inability to pay these fees or even know about the waivers would turn these innocent members of our community into criminals. And that is exactly why proposals like this cannot be rushed, and they must include rigorous and equitable public outreach to all members of the city. And yeah.
Could I ask a question? And again,
Of course.
you know, there are a lot of, in your comments, you know, I hear that policy doesn't work or that policy won't make a difference. But what kinds of policies could responsible gun owners get behind? Because I think that part of the dialogue too is, what are those common sense solutions that that we can find common ground, right? This a forum is called Common Ground. Where is the common ground? I think that, you know, I'm a mother, I have children, I fear violence every day. I'm from the east side of San Jose, and I think, what are we doing to prevent violence? So are there some sensible solutions that you want to share with us?
I thank you. Thanks for asking it kind of a more deep dive. And specifically, we should be focusing our law enforcement efforts on solving gun-related crimes, especially guns brought in illegally from the state or across state lines, gun purchased through felony straw purchases. As Vice Mayor Jones said, that is a big deal if they're happening here. We do want to make sure we go after those and prosecute those, and especially ghost guns, which are home-built guns where the builder does not follow California laws, including passing a background check and acquiring a serial number. Possession of a ghost gun is a felony, and those types of things, going after those behaviors, criminals, is where I think we should start. But all of that, again, this is my opinion. It's been informed by some of my friends and family and colleagues, but those voices that I'm in touch with, I think need to be brought to the table across the board. For example, large projects like Deer Dawn or the downtown plans, those all have multiple community meetings, hundreds of them with a lot of community input and vetting. There hasn't been that for discussions like this, and laws have been passed and continue to be proposed. And I would suggest that is not the right approach that Transparent City needs to take.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. I'd like to open it up to our panelists to respond to some of these comments. I think there's a lot of richness in what you shared. And so Vice Mayor Chappie Jones, would you like to start?
Well, first of all, I like to start by saying, Kirk, yes. I say yes to everything that you proposed, and then some. One of the issues, and we also have to take into consideration that we're coming out of a period of mass incarceration where we've, locked up criminals, more criminals for any industrialized nation in the world. So, and that didn't stop the problem. So enforcement obviously is one piece of the puzzle, but prevention is another piece. It's one thing to catch the perpetrator after they commit the crime or commit the murder. There's another thing to prevent it from happening at all. And so I agree with everything that Kurt laid out in terms of what we need to do and some of the measures that we need to take. But to me, it's not an either or, it's an and. It's everything that Kirk said, as well as all the other proposals that are coming out. And some of them might work and some of them might not. But at this point in our society, and what's happening in terms of just the carnage that's taking place in our streets, I don't want to leave anything on the table in terms of any policy recommendations or any laws that can prevent this violence from taking place. And I just want to also make one other point too. One of the reasons why I wanted to start out my discussion in terms of how this is personal for me, because I know that for a lot of people, there's a perception that this is grandstanding or it's just political posturing. And so I just want to make it very clear that for me, this is heartfelt and personal. So I just want to make that point.
Thank you. Tara, what is your response to some of what's been shared in terms of policies that work, don't work? Could they have prevented this mass shooting? I'd love to hear from you.
So I'm actually a gun owner. I am pro-guns. Alex and I have always been pro-guns. I think the conversation of all or nothing is the conversation that needs to stop personally. It's not about taking away the guns or letting everybody have whatever guns they want and do whatever they want with them. It's about regulating them, as far as I'm concerned, is the conversation that should be being had. And, the system that we live by on a daily basis for everything that we do, driver's license, buying alcohol, all of these things are all regulated, heavily regulated. And I find it absolutely asinine that we have to go through more steps to get a driver's license and drive a car than we do in order to have a gun. And I think that when you put people in a position of asking them to follow specific rules and to know exactly where the line is and have some sort of a facility or another government entity that regulates, just like the police can pull us over and check your car. It's like, why do we not have people that have to have a license to own a gun? Just like you have to have a license to drive a car, okay? And then why are these, not able to be checked? Like, hey, let me see, do you have the guns that you say you're supposed to have? Let me knock on your door and say, I want to do a gun check. Where's the guns? Are they stored correctly? Are they the ones you say you're supposed to have? Okay, great. You're doing exactly what you're supposed to do. Good for you. We're going to leave you alone. And then you have a number that people can call and say, you know what? I heard this person saying that he was willing to do something and he owns guns, and I'm concerned about that. And you have that agency go in and say, hey, look, we're taking your guns. We're going to check you out. And if everything seems to be fine, then here's your guns back. Sorry for your inconvenience. Move on with life. And I also do believe that there should be psych evaluations done on these people. This mental health is the main issue with mass shootings, okay? These is always the problem. And I mean, just statistically looking at this year so far, we've had 370 people killed as of this point in time in 2021. That's 50% more than last year at this time, okay? And we are all been going through COVID, mental health. People are angry, people are frustrated, people feel powerless. Guns make people feel more powerful. And that's why people do what they do. And so until you start from scratch and say, hey, look, you're allowed your guns because you are. And that's fine. But you need to regulate it just like we did at Prohibition time with alcohol. It's the same exact situation. So stop talking about how can we take the guns away and start talking about how can we do it responsibly to keep people safe. So people like Kirk and I, who are law-abiding gun owners, who do what we're supposed to do, don't get harassed. And the people that shouldn't have the guns, shouldn't have the guns. And for me, that's the biggest thing. The man that did the shooting, by the way, had 32 extended clips for his free 9mm automatic weapons, which are illegal in California. So how did he get 32 extended clips? That's the conversation you need to be thinking about. How can this person have told somebody back in 2016 at the Border Patrol that he was having dark thoughts about wanting to kill people at work and no one did anything? So for you to tell me that there's no policies that can be created that could have stopped this is not true.
Thank you for sharing your comments. And I think it's, it's very, as I'm listening to you, the fact that you are a gun owner, you bring a very unique perspective to this conversation, given how violence has impacted your family, and you also believe in gun ownership. So I think that people that, like yourself, who are gun owners, definitely have great ideas too, in terms of how our society can better regulate. So I appreciate your comments. I want to open up the conversation a little bit broader, aside from this conversation about mass shootings, to include Maria Inés, who's also very concerned about community violence. She has been a community leader in the Cadillac Winchester neighborhood in West San Jose, and she's helped launch a neighborhood association with the support of Project Hope, and also partnering with Vice Mayor Jones's office. Maria Inés, could you tell us again a little bit about how, what did you do to start the association, and what has been its impact on gun violence in the community?
Buenas tardes a todos. No fue fácil para mí empezar en la asociación de vecinos. Hace muchos años, Rosemary ha sido nuestra casa, donde mi hija mayor fue expuesta a balaceras por pandillas, peleas entre pandillas.
Déjame interpretar por ti, María. Hi, everybody. I'm Maria Inés Ortega Barrera. And I am, sorry, I'm getting a little feedback here. Sorry about that. And it wasn't easy to start the association in Rosemary, where I live and where my daughter was the victim of gun violence.
So, las peleas entre pandillas no fue fácil, pero en el 2016, cuando Chapi, nuestro vicemayor Distrito 1, nos apoyó creando la Asociación de Vecinos, esto nos ayudó a tener una fuerza, una confianza entre nuestra comunidad.
When Vice Mayor Chappie helped us to provide, to create the organization, he was able to tell us how to do it, and he was able to help us create the organization. It was very helpful.
Empezamos a crear una amistad con la policía, la confianza, el poder hacer las llamadas al 911.
It gave us the confidence to call the police and to call 911.
Esto
Maria,
ayudó
do me a favor, come to the English channel, sweetie. Because not everybody can hear you very well. And then Quy, I know you have to be in the English channel to hear me, so she has to say the Vietnamese. So we're gonna do it in 3 parts to be all inclusive with all our foreign language speakers. Okay, Maria, please continue.
Al crear una amistad con nuestro vecindario, nuestra comunidad, les dimos la confianza del poder hacer reportes a la policía, entrenándonos con Marta Domínguez.
Through the association, we were able to give people the confidence to include the police and to reach out to the police thanks to the training of Marta Domínguez.
Y creando la asociación fuerte, invitando a nuestros vecinos a ser parte de la asociación de vecinos.
And making a strong association to make a strong association of neighbors,
Incluyendo a mis hijos.
including
Alguien-
my children.
Estoy orgullosa de una niña mayor que tengo hoy, 21 años, empezó de 16 años siendo parte de nuestra asociación de vecinos.
Oh my God, I have a girl who's 17 years old who began to be part of our neighborhood association.
Esto me ayudó como madre, como vecina del vecindario, a invitar a nuestra asociación de vecinos a crear una asociación fuerte para mantenernos seguras.
So this, when I saw the children joining the association and how strong the association was becoming, gave me even more strength to make it a very strong association of neighbors.
No ha sido fácil. Sé que es difícil contra las pandillas, pero nada es imposible si seguimos enseñando a nuestros hijos, a nuestra comunidad. Y doy gracias a Chapi, nuestro vicemayor, David Gómez, Gray Canija, Hilda, que nos han ayudado a ser fuertes en esta asociación de vecinos.
It's not easy at all, and it has been quite a challenge. But what we found out is that together we can do a lot more, and we feel very secure in the knowledge that we are neighbors helping neighbors. And we had Vice Mayor Chappie, Hilda, and a couple of other people that she said that, I'm sorry, I don't remember. Thank you very much to those people.
Maria Inés, thank you so much for sharing that perspective of, the importance of, communities getting involved, having direct contact with their legislators, directly with the San Jose Police Department, as you've mentioned. And I particularly enjoyed hearing about your daughter and young people in your community also taking action and being leaders and expressing their voices and their concerns. There's such an important role for communities to play in this conversation. So thank you so much for your comments. I want to take this conversation back to Tara. And, as we've learned about the mass shooting on May 26th, and as you've shared some of the frightening details You know, your husband had heard about this possible situation before. He alerted VTA to what he heard. How could VTA have prevented this workplace violence? And what do you think needs to happen? What must change?
I've actually had this conversation with VTA, had a very, very candid conversation with them on this topic. And the reality is that there is a lack of education with the supervisors and a lack of willingness for the employees to feel like they should come forward to the supervisors, because the supervisors tend to not respond. Actually, the families are demanding that 4 of the supervisors be terminated because they were, in our opinions, complacent. My husband was not the only person that had told these supervisors. Supervisors had witnessed on a daily basis verbal confrontation between the shooter and victims. And so that is something that we have actually requested from VTA to do, because to us it seems very similar of a police officer, you know, being on trial for killing someone and still being part of the police department. Granted, I know these people aren't at this point on trial, but we know because we have letters, we have things that our husbands wrote and hid and told us. And we, you know, if you ask any wife that lost someone in Building B, we all knew about Sam, and we were all very worried about Sam. And so I think there is definitely, and I had this conversation actually with the captain of the sheriff's department too. I think there is a situation of people say stuff and then they actually end up getting punished for it by the supervisors. I know that's something my husband told me in the past was, you know, you just don't make waves. You just go in, you do your job, and you leave, because the supervisors will just make your life horrible. And this, you know, having this information really is a big part of why we have requested these 4 individuals be terminated. And I do know at this point that they have not been allowed to be back into contact with any of the employees, but we would like more for sure. I mean, I definitely would. I want my husband's legacy to be worth something. I mean, he didn't deserve this. He wasn't even supposed to be there. And none of these men deserved this. And something has to change. It just does. I mean, I think companies should. And as we know from this week, we had a VTA trainee vocalize threats about shooting up the Shibuya yard. And he was arrested because the supervisor did the right thing. He called the police. And, you know, if that is the good that comes from this situation, then so be it. I agree with Vice Mayor Chappie. I think that even with my policy that I would like to push forward with legislation, if that deters one person from committing a mass shooting, then I'm all in. You know, it's, you got to do it brick by brick, unfortunately, and you can't be great if you just wave a magic wand and it was completely fixed. But we didn't get this way overnight, and it's not going to get fixed overnight either.
Thank you. As I'd like to open it up to others on the panel. Again, if we're looking specifically at the mass shooting on May 26th, you know, what other policies could have stopped this tragedy? From what we know, the gunman did legally have this gun that was used, right? You want to weigh in?
I'm sorry, he had 3. He had 3 9mm automatics that he had legally.
Mm-hmm.
And Yeah, I mean, to me, what bothered me was the fact that he was so well supplied with ammunition. He did have the 32 extended clips, which he shouldn't have been able to obtain one, let alone 32 of them. So sorry, I just wanted to.
No, thank you for clarifying that point. Vice Mayor?
Yes.
From a policy perspective, and again, you had said before, you know, impossible almost from your perspective to be able to, you know, attack every single issue related to this issue, but you know, what are some policies that might have been in place that could have prevented this issue?
Great question. Really, if you look at a lot of these mass shootings, there typically were early warning signs. Somebody had concerns, somebody heard something, somebody saw something posted on social media. So there's oftentimes a lot of red flags that lead up to the incident. If we can create policies around how we can identify those red flags and coordinate with the city, county, federal agencies, state agencies to create some type of process and analytics around identifying, tracking, and following up on those red flags, I think that would go a long way to prevent some of these tragedies from taking place. Obviously, that's going to take a very monumental effort to mobilize those types of resources, but I think the only other option is to allow these things to continue to happen, and that's just totally unacceptable.
Kirk, do you want to jump in here and also talk about, again, policy solutions, you know, when it comes to being able to prevent a tragedy like this from happening again?
Sure, yeah, I appreciate that. There's a lot to comment on in what you spoke about, but are a couple things I just have to call out the difference between licensing something because we license other things like cars and alcohol and stuff like that. Owning a firearm is not it's a right. It's not an optional. It's something that you're given in the Constitution. It's a enumerated right. And I know we keep going back to the Second Amendment, you know, blah blah. I'm not trying to talk NRA speak or anything like that. But there is a fundamental difference between a privilege and a right. Driving your car down the street is a privilege. You have to get licensed. You have to pass certain things. It is not something that you regulate. Like a firearm is a different type of thing. And I know that's hard to talk about in some of these contexts because it seems like it should be, but we have to deal with things as they are. And how can we then know that? How can we build things around that respects that in a way to respect what that right is, just like we respect free speech, the right to vote, and not creating things like other taxes or things that inhibits people to exercise their rights. And if you talk about a list and are you on this list, you do that gets into registries, and those are actually illegal. Those kinds of federal registries are not even allowed to be done. And for a number of reasons, this is definitely not the place to get into that technical type of discussion, but I think we need to have those discussions. I encourage those discussions because I think it's really important that we're all on the same page with the data and what what is real in the laws, what laws exist, and then what laws aren't we enforcing that we should be enforcing, or we're just dismissing. Like a lot of the gun crimes that are out there, they get knocked down to misdemeanors and pleaded out. That's a problem. That's like a real problem. And when you talk about, if we add more laws, if we can save one life, yes, everyone we want to save, but I would plead with you that our resources are finite. They are thin and they are stretched thin, especially our law enforcement, which is about a third understaffed right now. And to pile onto that.
If I could have you, focus on the actual question about policy to prevent some sort of mass shooting like that. Do you have some?
So there are a couple specific things that I had mentioned earlier, but fund programs like Operation Ceasefire or others supported by the DOJ, the original Restart the Mayor's Gang Prevention Task Force that I believe Mayor Cardo abandoned in 2018. I don't know the details around that, but it's not in operation right now. And frankly, we haven't talked about it yet, but concealed carry weapon permits, issuing those are regulated, and those do have a place in our society when you meet certain legal requirements. And we're not even approaching that here in our county. And it's a tool that our county and our city can actually utilize that we have chosen not to.
We're going to continue the dialogue, and yes, we are going to talk about carry, conceal, and there are other topics, mental health, that we want to get to. There are a number of different things that we want to get within this next half hour. I'm going to jump over to Maria Inés. I know you've been supportive of the San Jose Police Department's gunshot detection program that was piloted in your neighborhood, the Cadillac Winchester neighborhood. Maria Inés, what do you feel? Do you feel that it's been helpful in preventing gun violence in your neighborhood? You know, how is that program working for you?
Sí, este programa nos ayudó a detectar cuando eran los disparos, a detectar las placas de un carro. Las cámaras pueden detectar ¿cómo se dicen? Las caras de las personas.
So let me say what you said, Maria. Thank you. So basically, we have a program where the cameras can register the license plates and can also check the features of the faces of the people who are shooting the guns.
Ayudó también a varios arrestos.
It made us able to arrest some people.
Nos sentíamos más seguros.
We felt a lot safer.
Nuestros niños podían caminar seguros en las calles.
We felt that our children could walk on the streets safely.
Pero nunca olvidamos de que nuestra comunidad tenía que comunicarse al 911 si veía.
Yeah, we couldn't forget that we had to call 911 if we saw something.
En cada reunión siempre hemos tenido una bonita comunicación con la oficina de la policía de San José.
Every meeting we've had a very nice interaction with the police department, and bringing the community together with the police is helpful.
Thank you for sharing a little bit of what you see are some of the positive results from this particular program. I'm going to jump over to Kirk, and I know that Congress recently passed a bipartisan bill expanding background checks for gun purchases. Do you feel that background checks have been an effective practice for keeping guns only in the hands of responsible gun owners?
Simply, yes. Background checks work. I think everyone should be comfortable with getting a background check. It doesn't get to the root of the larger problem. And let's be clear, criminals don't use licensed dealers to purchase firearms. But we need to address the underlying causes of violence in our community. I went on record, actually with San Jose Spotlight, that I supported both federal bills, one on background checks and the 10-day waiting period. To me, they just make sense. The reality is California's been doing this for years, keeping guns out of the hands of criminals, people who are diagnosed mentally ill, and those who cannot own a firearm. By implementing them at the federal level, yeah, I think it would help reduce crime, especially across state lines. But I think it's important to keep in mind, in order to purchase a firearm legally here in California, the purchaser has to go through a licensed dealer with a federal firearms license, FFL, no exceptions. There's a family exception, but in general, for the 99.9, no exceptions. Submit to and pass federal background checks. Everyone needs to pass a background check. Wait 10 days before they take their firearm. You can't just buy a gun and leave with it. And then sign that document that I mentioned before that says it's basically not a straw purchase. You're buying it for yourself. And all that being said, you can definitely have the more rules you put on, you can weigh down with diminishing returns. I think we need to, again, invest in evidence-based programs, prosecute gun criminals, and hold people accountable, and create that kind of natural deterrence. If we step up and prosecute, that will actually deter people from being criminals. It's, you hear about these tragedies. and whether it's the Gilroy tragedy, the VTA one, and it makes us all sick. And it's frustrating that these continue to happen. And how do we go about doing it? I think we all are on the same page. And Tara, I feel deeply for you and every other victim on this. I think we agree on a lot more than we disagree on. And having that conversation is critical to moving forward. And something that isn't shared often, and I think we also have to put this in the discussion, is roughly 60% of all firearm deaths are by suicide. And that is a tragedy in and of itself.
Thank you for sharing those statistics with us. Vice Mayor Jones, I know that Mayor Sam Liccardo wants to take forward, he wants to push for gun control further by proposing a fee on gun owners to pay for emergency services and police response related to gun violence. What evidence exists to show that a fee, as is being proposed, would do anything to prevent suicides or any criminal acts of gun violence or mass shootings?
Thank you for that question. Before I answer that question, I just want to clarify that the Mayor's Gang Prevention Task Force is currently in existence and operating and fully viable. So I just want to just clarify that. As far as the fee is concerned, the money that would be raised by the fee would be able to go into support services, mental health services, gun violence reduction initiatives. So it wouldn't have a direct impact in terms of reducing gun violence, but it would have an indirect kind of downstream impact of reducing gun violence, because the money can be used for programs and initiatives that would eventually reduce gun violence.
Thank you for clarifying. The next question that I have is for Maria Inés. I often think our youth who are growing up in gang neighborhoods and how they're exposed to gun violence. Are we doing enough here locally in San Jose to prevent youth from falling into gang violence? What are some of the things that you're working on, and what do we need to do more of in our community, again, to prevent violence impacting our young people?
Para mí lo esencial es trabajar junto con los concejales, tener el soporte para nuestros jóvenes.
So for me, the most important thing is to work with the council members to have the support for the young people.
Que nos escuchen la necesidad de nuestra comunidad, no ser segregados.
That they listen to the needs of our community and that they don't segregate us.
Ocupamos recursos para poder tener nuestro centro comunitario.
We need resources to be able to have a community center.
Y tener los recursos para los jóvenes que están en pandillas.
And to have some resources for the kids who are involved in gangs.
Logremos que nuestros jóvenes sean graduados de diferentes.
Hoping that our youth will be able to graduate from different.
Y también la ayuda mental, porque no sabemos por qué están en las pandillas.
And give them some kind of mental health because we don't know why they're involved with the gangs.
Necesitamos los recursos, que nuestros jóvenes tengan la ayuda para seguir sus estudios.
We need the resources so that the kids have the opportunity to continue their school.
Yo sé que los que están arriba, todos los de la ciudad, nuestros gobiernos, nuestro presidente,
I know that everybody who's above the government, the president,
nos pueden apoyar con los recursos. Esta es una solución.
could help us out with the resources because this would be a solution.
Gracias, Maria Inés. Those are great points, again, when we're talking about prevention and looking at gun violence from the perspective of gang activity. And we really appreciate your comments on this particular issue. Again, in the interest of time, I'm going to continue moving forward with these questions because we have more and we still have some audience questions to address. This question is for everyone on the panel. Many states, including California, allow for carry concealed weapon permits, which is the practice of carrying a weapon in public in a concealed manner. What are your thoughts on carry concealed weapon permits? And do you feel that residents should be allowed to carry a handgun with them at all times as a means to protect themselves? Tara, perhaps we can start with you.
Okay, so I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yes, many states in California allow for carrying concealed weapons. And so we're asking, whether you think that residents should be allowed to carry a handgun with them at all times to protect themselves. What do you think about these concealed weapon permits?
Well, I have a brother that is a San Jose police officer. Like I said, I'm a gun owner. I don't think putting more guns in people's hands is a good idea, because not everybody's a great shot, and not everybody's going to make sure that their emotions or mental state of that day is not going to get the best of them. I mean, I think we all like to believe that put in a position, we would do the right thing, and we would not behave in a certain way. But people snap, and that's what we see in a lot of these shootings, just like Vice Mayor Jones stated with his situation in his drive-through. That person snapped over something ridiculous. And so I don't think the answer is putting more guns in civil people's hands. I do think the answer is getting more police, obviously, and making sure that they're out in the community and really understanding what's going on in the community. San Jose is a very large city. And I know for myself, anytime I've ever had to call the police, sometimes they just don't show up, and I know my brother has stated that they are shorthanded. So I think anytime when someone has to have a permit to have a gun is a good thing, but I don't necessarily think carrying them out in the public is the best way to handle things.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. Kirk, do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, hey, thanks, Perla. The simple answer is yes. I think, frankly, I think any Californian who understands and accepts the responsibility of carrying a firearm should be able to carry one. I think there should be clear expectations for anyone applying for a concealed carry CCW license. I would also suggest a mandatory training program that is cost effective and available to anyone, with scholarships available for people that cannot afford a modest cost. The reality is CCW license holders are not criminals. In 2013, there was a major survey of over 15,000 police officers nationwide on this very subject, and 91% of them are in agreement with civilian concealed carry permits being issued. 80% of the police respondents from the same survey stated armed citizens would reduce the number of persons hurt in mass shootings. There is no evidence that CCW holders use a firearm to commit a crime, and there is evidence that CCW holders can help mitigate a mass shooting tragedy. Saying you allow anyone to get a CCW doesn't mean anyone can decide to carry a gun and do it. There is extensive licensing and processes to follow here in California. It is highly regulated and monitored. It is part of a strategy to deter criminal behavior and potentially save lives. Thanks for letting me share my thoughts.
Yeah, thank you so much. Maria Ines, your thoughts on this exact same question. Do you think that people should be allowed to carry a handgun? Again, people with a carry concealed weapons permit?
En mi manera de pensar, creo que nadie debería tener un arma. Estamos expuestos a que nuestros hijos tomen el arma equivocada. Ha pasado muchos incidentes, no más muertes. Queremos seguridad para nuestra comunidad, para nuestros hijos.
In my opinion, nobody should have a gun. The guns are falling into the wrong hands. We don't know what child is going to pick up, and it's killing our children.
No más muertes. Esto tiene que parar. Esto duele.
We don't want any more deaths. This has to stop. It hurts.
Thank you, Maria Ines. I'm going to jump over to Vice Mayor Chappie Jones on this.
Necesitamos.
So under the right circumstances, yes, I support concealed carry permits. If someone is, say, involved with private security, or they're in a profession that would require them to have a concealed weapon, then I can understand that. But just for the average citizen walking the streets with either a concealed weapon or a weapon that's actually exposed, I would not feel comfortable in that scenario. I don't want to go back to the Wild Wild West. And if you talk about some of these mass shootings would have been less tragic if everybody had a gun, I think we can look to Texas, which is an open carry state, and they still have mass shootings, and they're and what they found is a lot of the harm happens in the first like 5 or 6 minutes of the shooting. And around that time is also the time when the police arrive. And so, the theory that if everybody had a gun, a mass shooting takes place, that we're all qualified and able to identify the shooter and actually strike them. Trust me, you would not want me to be in that scenario, because you don't want me to try to identify and target a shooter in a chaotic situation like that. And most of the people that I know, and I'm sure most of the population, would not be qualified or in a position to really add any benefit to a scenario like that.
I thank all of you for sharing your unique perspectives. You all come at it from different experiences, and again, it shows there's a long road ahead to find this common ground on an issue like this one. Another question here I have is for Vice Mayor Jones. Many gun rights groups and activists are promising to sue the city over these new measures that are being discussed. And we know that legal fights will be ahead, which will cost taxpayers money. What is the city doing to ensure that these new laws are defensible?
So right now, these are proposals that we've approved. And so we direct those proposals to our city attorney, and they're going to go through a very robust analysis and determination of the legality of our proposals and whether they're defensible. And they're going to come back to us with their opinion on whether it is or isn't. And if it's not defensible, if they don't feel that something that we can be successful in terms of defending, then we're not going to move forward. But for the ones that they feel that we can, or they're possibly in a gray area where we don't know for sure, then we're going to be very proactive in terms of moving those forward.
Thank you for addressing that. We are going to jump to some audience questions, because the time is just flying by this evening, and it's great dialogue. I appreciate everyone's active engagement. We're going to go ahead and go to one of the audience questions. The question is, minorities are incarcerated at higher rates than their white peers for all crimes, and given a 46% increase in legal gun ownership among minority groups per the National Sports Shooting Foundation, how does the Liccardo administration intend to avoid exacerbating mass incarceration by enacting policies that would turn thousands of his constituents into felons overnight? That's a very long question. Thank you for your audience participation. Vice Mayor? So
all of our proposals aren't gonna create a situation where someone is convicted of a felony. We're talking about fines, potential confiscation of your firearms, or at most a misdemeanor. So nothing that we're proposing is going to lead to mass incarceration or have a deleterious impact on the minority community.
Thank you. Another member of our audience is asking, is anyone focused on the mental health issues being missed in our family courts? The VTA shooter exhibited classic abuser patterns. with a false DVRO harassment case. We see this in nearly every mass shooting, says the member of our audience. Who would like to address that, the mental health issue, and again, in the context of family law courts?
I'll address it.
Thank you, Tara.
I think mental illness in general is a huge issue. And I think anytime when someone is feeling ways that they cannot themselves process and feel out of power, they tend to become violent. I mean, the reality is we react like animals. We're caged, cornered, we become, aggressive. So therefore, in situations of family court, and I can speak of this from myself, knowing because I had a very horrible childhood and was in family court myself as a child with a abusive parent. It is definitely an issue, and mental health in our society is an issue, and it plays into every aspect of our lives, whether it's our relationships with our people in our lives, or the interactions with the government or police or any of that. And so until people stop being afraid to acknowledge the fact that your brain is an organ and it requires health just like every other part of your body, and that this is just something we all have and we just need to deal with it, and it becomes something that needs to be handled. Ignoring it and pushing it to the side is not what we need to be doing. We've been doing that for the last 40 years. It doesn't work. Yes, we've gotten better with mental health. Yes, it is not so much a faux pas anymore as it used to be. But nevertheless, we're still falling incredibly short. And that's very well seen in this situation with BTA and the shooting. This gentleman was very aggressive with his ex-wife. He had a very long history pattern of, aggression and mental health issues. And that to me is a policy issue. When we have people like we have homeless people that are mentally ill. We have so many people in our society that are mentally ill, especially after going through a year and a half of COVID. I think we're all mentally ill at this point in time. You just have to deal with it and not push it to the side.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your comments. Anybody else want to chime into this conversation about mental health and also the issues that we see in our family court system?
Go ahead, Chappie. Sorry.
I was just going to say that the county recently adopted Laura's Law, which allows the courts to intervene on someone who's suffering from severe mental health issues. In the past, it had to be voluntary, and that obviously wasn't working for some of our residents who are really suffering from pretty severe mental illness. So with the adoption of Laura's Law, we can at least step in, the court can take action, they can't force someone to accept services, but they can create a scenario where the person is getting, or has an opportunity to receive those services and support. And so that's going to hopefully go a long way in terms of addressing some of the more severe mental health issues that we have in our community.
Thank you for sharing that.
I'll just add on to that. I mean, in general, I think our state, our county, so many places have failed us in the mental health space. I mean, a lot of mental hospitals have closed and a lot of services are not available. And there's been a lot of releases of people that are considered nonviolent, but maybe they have mental issues. And just the rehabilitation need in our society. I think it's something that if we understand that and we have places for people to get help, we can try and direct those energies at those people. But if we don't, they go unchecked. and our violence in our community increases because we're not providing the services necessary.
Thank you. Our time is almost up, and this has been quite an interesting conversation, lots of great information shared. I want to invite every single panelist, and we're going to start with you, Maria Ines. I'd like to ask you if you have any last words, any calls to action, anything you would like to share with our viewers, those who have joined us this evening on this topic. What thoughts do you want to leave us with this evening, Maria Ines?
Sí, más que nada, para mí, mi corazón está con mi comunidad. Y
More than
siempre
anything, my heart is with my community.
pido igualdad, equidad y que no haya recortes a nuestros oficiales.
I'm hoping for equity and equality and that we don't have reports about our officials.
Nuestra comunidad se tiene que mantener segura y a salvo
Our community has to be safe and sound,
y que todos tomemos conciencia de trabajar juntos
that we all work together and be conscious of that
para evitar más muertes
to avoid more deaths,
y que todos tomemos la mejor decisión de que nuestros hijos
and to take the very best decision for our children
sigan la educación
so that they can continue studies
y sean educados en programas comunitarios.
and be educated to work in community programs
Esto ayudará a que
This will
nadie
help.
entre en pandillas.
so that they don't join the gangs.
Gracias, Maria Ines. Thank you so much for sharing the perspective of our community, our young people, and talking about the important programs that you've seen work in your community. We really appreciate your participation tonight. Kirk, your final words this evening?
Well, first, I'd just like to thank everybody here, especially Josh, Ramona, and the Spotlight for hosting a discussion like this. I'm very, very grateful for it. I hope we can do two things. The first is to continue this conversation before passing new laws. More community engagement is critical. That's first. Second is to bring all stakeholders to the table to discuss solutions. It's so important to me that I recently co-founded a nonprofit called Silicon Valley Public Accountability Foundation to help consolidate some of our community voices around issues like this. I encourage you to learn more at svpaf.org and just stay engaged and participate in discussions, because that's how we can collectively make progress. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Kirk. We've really appreciated hearing your point of view this evening, and we thank you so much. Mayor Chappie Jones, Vice Mayor Chappie Jones, your thoughts?
I was gonna say, I just got a promotion.
I know, I keep promoting you.
First of all, I want to thank Josh and Ramona, as well as my fellow panelists for this very robust and enlightening discussion. I agree with Kurt in the sense that there's a lot that we agree on. All of the proposals that were brought up in this conversation, I wholeheartedly support. But again, I'm not a either or, I'm an and type of person. And I want to see any policy that we can create that's going to make a difference move forward. I also like the fact that we had a discussion in terms of how we can prevent these things from happening to begin with. And as far as the community is concerned, and Maria brought up some really great points, it's law enforcement, but it's also programs like Project Hope and technology like gunshot detection technology and all the other strategies and tools that we have that we can come up with that can prevent these tragedies from ever happening. And then I want to make one last point, and I'm going to make a prediction, and probably had to put it in a time capsule because it's not going to happen in my lifetime or in my children's lifetime. But I think there's going to be a point in this country where there's going to be a repeal of the Second Amendment. It was written at a different time with different technology, different types of weapons, and it's anachronistic for our current, culture and society, for the ability for people to have weapons that can kill large numbers of people very quickly. So my prediction is in probably about 100 years, we're going to see a change in the Constitution.
Thank you for those comments. We appreciate your participation tonight, and we appreciate the work that you do to serve our city. Tara, again, we thank you for participating tonight. Your voice and your point of view, what you've shared tonight with us has touched me, and I know it's touched everyone that has participated with us this evening. I'd like for you to share your last thoughts as we bring this program to a close.
I just want to thank Spotlight for having me and for hosting this conversation. My biggest point that I would like to share is that people need to realize that if this happens to you, and it could happen to you, you could be at Walmart or Target shopping, and then you're dead, you know, and it's just, there's nothing to take care of your family. There is no support. There's no government entity that is going to step in because guns are a right, as Kirk said. So therefore, our right to be protected is, I guess, not as important. So therefore, you need to understand that if somebody decides that today you should not be alive anymore, your family will be left hanging dry. And that is why I personally am pushing forward for this legislation, even if it is a small amount of money or a small moment that this person that wants to go out and do this heinous act pauses for a second to think about whether or not my family is now not going to be cared for because I'm going to go do something really horrific and then kill myself at the end. Maybe that's worth it to me. At this point in time, I think mental illness and mental health is a huge issue. And I think policies coming forward of, you know, you have to say something, you know, it's like a crime. It should be a crime. If you hear someone say, I'm going to go beat up this guy, or I'm going to go shoot this person, and you don't report it, you should be held responsible. Because the fact is that we have to help the police. We cannot expect them to be there and be available for every single thing that's going to be heard and said, and be able to move on that. And that's exactly what VTA did on Monday, and they called the police and they did the right thing this time. And we need to see more of that in our society. We need people being willing to show up for other people, for their safety, because it is a community issue. It is not a personal issue.
Tara, thank you so much. You've given us so much to think about. And I think that if there's one thing that we heard tonight is that we need more dialogue amongst each other, and that we need to share more of these perspectives. And every one of you have really helped us bring lots of ideas to the table. So once again, I want to thank all of our panelists for your amazing participation tonight. This dialogue will continue. I'm a resident of San Jose, and I want to see more dialogue on this issue as well, as a mother and someone who cares about my community. This is going to be the end of our discussion. We're going to wrap this up. And I want to just remind all of our viewers and readers that, you know, there are so many challenges and perspectives around this gun policy issue. And San Jose Spotlight is here to cover this issue. I want to thank again our sponsors, the Heising Simmons Foundation, Hope and Heal Fund, and the Knight Foundation. And again, to all of our panelists for being here tonight. There will be a video recording of today's webinar available on the San Jose Spotlight website next week. And again, to follow our coverage and learn more about how to support nonprofit journalism and programming like this, we invite you to visit our website, sanjosespotlight.com. Thank you once again for tuning in this evening, and I look forward to seeing you again at a future event. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much.